Look, I am not an automotive engineer, nor do I pretend to be one, but all my years of experience, both at the OEM level and as an automotive journalist, have given me a pretty good appreciation and understanding of what it takes to make a modern vehicle. And I'd argue that even more goes into the ground-up development of something like the Wagoneer S, which is Jeep's first fully electric vehicle. But that also means it's even more important to get it right, and while this thing has a lot going for it, it also falls flat in some fundamental ways. For more expert car reviews, don't forget to share our channel and subscribe so you can catch some of this and maybe even a little of that. All right, I want to start with one of the ways I think the team behind the Wagoneer S absolutely nailed it, and that is the design. And one of the biggest benefits of EVs from a styling perspective is that they can look a lot like concept vehicles since they need to be so slippery and aerodynamic, and that is on full display here. I also love this 7-slot light bar up front. It's a nice callback to the look on the front ends of most Jeep vehicles over the last number of decades. Very cool. I also love that this is almost like a modern interpretation of a Grand Cherokee. Not really sure why they didn't call it that, but anyways, I still absolutely love the look, and this spoiler on the back is great. I love how it's open at the top, a very nice touch. The only miss for me here, these wheels, and normally I'm the kind of guy that advocates for smaller wheels, but these 20s, they look puny against this low and wide body. You know, I'd say this interior is pretty excellent too, although this optional red upholstery is doing a lot of the heavy lifting, but it really makes this space pop, and it becomes the star of the show instead of all these screens. And yes, these are a problem, especially, I don't know if it's the angle that the infotainment screen is on or what, but it looks really splotchy, and I can honestly say I've never experienced anything like this. I don't know if it's an OLED screen or what, but if you look at it through polarized lenses, either sunglasses or a camera filter, it just looks really spotty and weird. It is not good, and it doesn't matter what angle you're looking at it from. It just looks awful. And then you've got this screen down below that, yeah, it's okay in terms of the visuals. It's kind of cool that it's retractable, so if you want to hide stuff or access the USB ports, you just slide it up and then you can drop it back down so stuff is out of sight. But I would much rather see a bank of physical controls down there. And then there's this passenger side display that I just don't get why these are all the rage with automakers these days. I don't know many people who have said they are looking for them. Maybe it's used to justify the asking price, who knows, but it just doesn't really seem necessary in here, in my opinion anyways. This screen in front of me, it's okay, but it has a problem of its own. But before we get to that, let's talk about another issue, and that is with the infotainment system itself. And that's normally not an issue with Stellantis products. Uconnect has long been one of the best interfaces in the business, but this one is really glitchy. There's lots of lag when you're switching between features and functions. And then earlier this week, I was trying to send a text message using voice command. I was out on the road and it worked fine. Siri recognized what I wanted to say, read it back to me, and it was perfectly okay. But then the entertainment system didn't kick back on. For some reason, it got caught in this sort of purgatory state where the satellite radio wouldn't work. I couldn't switch audio sources. And when I adjusted the volume, it was stuck on the voice recognition volume, but nothing was actually coming out of the speakers. I could just adjust the volume itself, but there wasn't actually anything coming out of the speakers. And yeah, that might have been a CarPlay issue, but considering everything else that's been going on with this vehicle, I wouldn't put my money on that. And then getting back to this screen here, well, it does show you the state of charge as well as how much is remaining when you're hooked up to a charging station, but it doesn't stay on. It goes black after a few seconds. And when I'm hooked up to a public charger, I like to have the vehicle off so I can maximize the charge. And I like to be able to see what the state of charge is in real time. And that means the only way to do it here is to either turn the vehicle on or open the door and close it again. But again, it doesn't stay active. And yeah, that might not seem like a big deal to you, but to me, it is emblematic of a bigger issue with the user experience here that I'm just not in love with. Oh, and then one more issue just to add to the list, this head-up display. I cannot see it. And yes, it is lowered in its lowest position, but when I am sitting upright, I can't see anything except the very bottom of the speed limit of whatever road I'm at. And this has been an issue I've had with Stellantis products in the past, including the Ram 1500 and the full-size Jeep Wagoneer and Grand Wagoneer. It is just so weird. Anyway, let's get to the EV essentials, starting with this big battery pack that measures 100.5 kilowatt hours. And it's bookended by 2 electric motors, which means this thing has all-wheel drive, and it's a Jeep. That's kind of its whole thing. Anyways, they make a combined 600 horsepower and 617 pound-feet of torque, which is a whole lot, and it's creeping awful close to Grand Cherokee Trackhawk territory. If you guys remember that wicked Jeep that I reviewed a very long time ago, but maybe we could find some of the footage or at least a link to that review from early pandemic days. Anyways, this thing is capable of all kinds of EV quickness, but that's not what it's all about. I mean, if you put it in sport mode, yeah, it'll chirp the tires from a standing start, or even when you are moving. It's pretty impressive, but more importantly, it's equally impressive just how easy it is to kind of dole out that output for everyday scenarios. So if you're using this thing as a daily driver, which I'd imagine that is the goal, it is perfectly fine. It's also easy to drive it efficiently. I've been beating the official estimate, barely, but it's also cold this week. We're talking late November here, and it's been right around 19.5 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers. So a few less than it's rated for. That's pretty good. I took it for a 150 kilometer drive the other day, a nice split between city, country, and highway roads. Triple digit speeds. I was actually worried about it because looking at this gauge in the instrument display, it was buried into the 30s, and I thought, oh man, this thing's gonna struggle, but it's actually been pretty good. Less good is the way the regenerative braking works. Now, there are only 2 settings to choose from, minimum or maximum, and then yes, there's creep mode that you can disengage, so you can use a proper 1-pedal drive and just ease off the accelerator to bring this thing to a stop. But my one complaint is that it defaults back to minimum. There's no way to set maximum as your default setting. I happen to prefer to maximize the regen because that to me is what this should be all about. It's an EV. You want to maximize your efficiency. So recovering as much kinetic energy as possible makes a whole lot of sense. But if I run into the grocery store or something and I get back in the vehicle, if I forget to turn the maximum regen back on, then I have to fumble through some different pages in this infotainment system that, as I just mentioned, is sort of glitchy. So I don't like that. And the other thing is, I find this pedal very difficult to modulate in certain scenarios anyway. So let's say, I don't know, low speed, you're looking for a parking spot and you go to back in, which of course you should always do because there can be nobody creeping up from behind you when you go to leave a parking spot, but when you're backing out, there could be a person or another vehicle, and it's the safest way to park. But anyways, in those situations, I find it gets really jumpy and lurchy, and it's difficult to modulate this pedal. I have all kinds of EV experience, and this might be the worst I have ever had. Now, I've also got to be honest, I don't love the range this thing has. It's officially rated for 473 kilometers, which seems a little light considering the size of the battery pack. I'd like to see more than 500. Now, in fairness, I've been pretty close to that. It was indicating right around 480 when I charged the other day, which isn't bad, but again, just a little bit more would be that much better. And then maximum charge speeds, just around 200 kilowatts at a DC fast charger. I hooked up to a 190 kilowatt station the other day, and I was able to draw 125 kilowatts, which isn't terrible considering there were 2 other EVs hooked up at the same time as me, and I was able to go from 32 to 80% in less than half an hour. And again, considering it was barely above zero, that's not too bad. Now the full charge, I don't know, it took around an hour and a half. Again, that's not terrible, all things considered, and those lower speeds do limit battery degradation, so it's nice to see this thing sort of future-proof. But here is probably my biggest issue of the entire Jeep Wagoneer S experience, the asking price, because this fully loaded version that I'm driving, it's priced right around $95,000 before tax here in Canada. Now, I also want to point out that yes, this one I'm driving is a 2025. That's not my fault. Blame that on Stellantis because they just reached out to offer this on the press fleet here in Toronto for the first time this fall. So I don't know what the holdup is, but hey, I thought it was better to get you guys the video than nothing at all. Now, there are some good features for the money, like massaging front seats, heated and ventilated front and second row seats. You've got some good stuff. There's also a good amount of space in here, but here's my biggest hangup. For even less money than Jeep is charging for this thing, you can get a similarly sized package, some of them with more range and even with hands-free highway driving assist, and that is not something that's available here. To recap, I like the Wagoneer S's futuristic styling, as well as how roomy it is and that it's easy to drive efficiently. I don't like how flawed the technology it has can be, the way the regen braking works, or how expensive it is. I don't think a single automaker out there has absolutely nailed their first ever EV, so it's not as if I'm trying to hold Jeep or Stellantis to some sort of unrealistic standard. But I do think the Wagoneer S could have been executed better, and not just because it's so expensive, but also because of how long it took to get here. Now, regardless of what the naysayers will tell you, EVs like this, they still matter. So delivering unfinished ones, they only serve to harm the people who might actually buy them. The optimistic outlook is that a lot of these issues could be addressed through software updates, but then they could just as easily be used to deem a promising product a failure before it ever gets a chance to establish itself.